We started talking about war crimes for Pete Hegseth before Congress did. And now Congress has woken up and decided that they need to see the full video of Pete Hegseth giving the order to double tap the boat and take out 2 human beings clinging to the side of a boat during one of the 20 attacks on fishing boats in the Caribbean. Release the Epstein files? Sure. Release the video of Pete Hegseth having given the command to fire at 2 human beings clinging to life on a ship that had already been fired upon. That's not only called a war crime, that's called murder. And there's going to be tribunals when everything's said and done in the Trump administration. Think of them like Nuremberg trials after the Holocaust, except in those little glass cages inside the courtroom are people like Pete Hegseth, Stephen Miller, Pam Bondi, Todd Blanche, and the rest. Donald Trump may be eating popcorn because he's got immunity and watching it all go down on his local cable channel, but we'll be there for these types of tribunals. And now the Congress has woken up about what Pete Hegseth just admitted he did. We cover it on Legal AF, the podcast, and here's a clip.
Welcome back to Legal AF. We've got a lot to discuss in this last segment. Popok, why don't we just go straight to talking about this blockbuster Washington Post report, which is, by the way, consistent with what we were. I think it was more than just simply we would be speculating about what took place. I mean, you had a 4-star admiral from Southcom, which is that region, kind of abruptly quit and resign, which you never see take place. Someone halfway through their term like that. That was 4-star Admiral Hoseley. He resigned. Obviously, we had heard stories from the president of Colombia and others in the region in Trinidad and Tobago that a lot of these people in these fishing boats that had been shot down by the Trump regime, that these people were fishermen, that they were not drug traffickers. In any event, even if you assume that they were low-level drug trafficking mules, at worst, they were the lowest level in the drug hierarchy. People who have the task of basically their life being threatened or are in the most destitute, and they're being sent by the cartels out. Now, we also know based on the size of these boats, 24 feet, these are not big boats that are being used. They likely don't have the fuel to even get into the United States. So they would have to be refueled several times. They were likely probably going other places in the region if they were going anywhere with drugs. We also know for a fact that there was not fentanyl in those boats. I mean, if anything, there was cocaine. The fentanyl comes from basically the precursor, and the ingredients in fentanyl come from Mexico. They're not coming from the region of Venezuela or Colombia. For sure, they aren't there. So those are kind of the undisputed facts. And look, we have Coast Guard. Donald Trump was talking about on that deranged press conference he gave on Friday about the Coast Guard cutters, those Coast Guard ships. For a very long time, we have these Coast Guard cutters interdict the ships that are close to the United States. They go on the ships. They see if the boats have drugs on them. I think the statistic is somewhere around 1/4 of the ships that they believe have the drugs on them actually don't. But that's why they interdict. They see there's a process. They don't kill them. And if there are drugs on it, they arrest the people, and then they try to figure out the source, and then they build a methodology, because ultimately they want to get to the high-level traffickers. Popok, like Juan Hernandez, like
the president of Honduras,
the guy in the Honduras. You take your sources, you find who the real person is, you run a case against that person, and that person gets sentenced to 45 years.
It's hard to interrogate them when you blow them up.
And one of the things that we've seen in Colombia and Honduras is actually, I'm not going to say that they're drug free. Let's not get carried away. But you've actually seen with President Petro of Colombia, with Xiomara Castro in Honduras, for the first time, with help of the United States, real efforts to reduce the drug narco states in those countries. Now, as the narco states in those countries have diminished, you've seen an increase in fentanyl from China and Mexico and elsewhere. So, it's a little bit of a whack-a-mole game taking place, but we've seen what the right efforts can do in Honduras and in Colombia. But let's talk about what this new reporting, though, that Hegseth ordered SEAL Team 6, which had always been viewed as the elite within the elite, shoot to kill if there were survivors of these boat strikes. And we know that there were survivors of the boat strikes, and then they followed an order to then kill the survivors. And this is a clear-cut war crime. We know it. Going back to the 1800s, this was defined as war crimes based on international agreements, obviously Geneva Conventions, obviously the Rome Treaty, and American law. These are war crimes. This is murder. And after World War II, there was a lot of examples of German U-boat captains, Japanese ships, examples like this, where people would shoot people in the water after they were surviving, and they held trials, and they were like death penalties that sent, people sentenced who were involved in these war crimes after World War II. Popok, break it all down.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I live in Miami, where drug trafficking was part of the scene throughout the 70s and 80s. I mean, you can leave in comments if you know what a square grouper is. A square grouper is bales of marijuana or coke that have been dumped overboard in shrink wrap by boats who have been interdicted, and the fishermen that later find them jokingly referred to them as square grouper. But interdiction, where you, as you said, you get to interrogate the people on the boat, extradite them, and move yourself up the chain and find out what was on the ship and go through a due process, is quite different than the 20 boats and 80 human beings that have been made to disappear by the Trump administration with a push of a button or a series of buttons off of Trinidad and Tobago and other drone locations. And what we don't have, when the Coast Guard interdicts, we hear about the tons of cocaine and whatever other drugs and the people that were on board and who they are. We don't know who these people are because the Trump administration doesn't know who they are. They go on and they lie to Congress, and Pete Hegseth says they were definitely Tren de Aragua. All right, give us the big board. Who in Tren de Aragua? Who are they? How are they connected to the cartel? How are these low-level guys on a fishing boat connected to Tren de Aragua? Tell us. No, because they don't know, because they don't know the identity of these people. And then let's go to phase 2. What was on board? As you said, they don't even know what's on board. That's why we haven't heard about, we stopped a ton of cocaine from going. It's not fentanyl coming out of these countries. It's coke and marijuana. It's mainly coke. So you've got that. You got the lying going on to Congress. And Congress getting upset about it, including ones that have been in the military. That's why you see at the very same moment you and I are talking about this story, former members of the military that are in Congress, senators and congresspeople, or members of the intelligence community, came up with the "Don't Give Up the Ship" video, in which they said, remember, rank and file and Army and Navy and other armed force brass, it is illegal. It is unconstitutional for you to follow an unconstitutional order. The Nuremberg principles, which came out of World War II, where German soldiers of different ranks tried to defend themselves for the Holocaust and the horrors that they perpetrated by saying, we were just following orders. That got thrown out as a defense. You have a moral and legal obligation not to follow illegal orders. That's been embedded in the Code of Military Justice for the United States, the Nuremberg principles. And you and I were talking before we came on the air that I would not be shocked if in 2028, 2029, there aren't televised Nuremberg-like trials of people in the Trump administration who have committed acts in violation of the Constitution and of penal law, murder, international law, and the rest. That's why we talked about at the top of this podcast about there's now people, it's coming out of people's mouths, this concept of the next Department of Justice and what they will do. First of all, there's going to be civilian lawsuits filed by the families of the 80 that disappeared. We may not know who they are, but they know who didn't come home from a fishing expedition. And they're going to be suing in American courts with American federal judges, including the ones you identified, who are not really thrilled with the Trump administration, on civil cases. You're going to see versus Pete Hegseth, because we just got new reporting coming out of the Washington Post, of all places, in which in the first strike, at least in September, which they only showed us the edited version of, because if the American people that have seen that video have said, if the American people saw the complete version, which is it was shocking to those in military who were watching this, on some screen, that 2 people survived 3 strikes on the boat, but they survived and they were hanging onto the side of the boat. And Pete Hegseth, according to the new reporting, gave an oral command, not the President of the United States, Pete Hegseth, to double tap that boat and fire another missile from a drone and take them out and leave no survivors. Let's just leave that. Let's let that reverberate for a second. That is a confession of a war crime and murder committed by the head of the Department of Defense or War, or whatever it is, that for which he does not have immunity the way that the President of the United States was given immunity by the United States Supreme Court 3 years ago in the Trump decision. He instead has a very flimsy Office of Legal Counsel conjured up, fabricated legal memo that says that he's allowed, because they've declared war or taken up arms against Venezuela, that anything that he does is right and has cover. But every other military justice analyst, including those within the military and outside the military, have all said that was the commission of a war crime. And the impunity by which this administration operates, the smugness by which they think they are imperious and they think they are immune to future prosecution and investigation, but it's just staggering. But it's going to start, Ben, with the civil cases that are going to be brought by those families in federal courts that are going to bring out all this evidence as the Trump administration scrambles to defend themselves. And they're not going to be able to say, but we got El Chapo, we got the head of the narco. You didn't get anything, because if you got it, you would have told us what it was. Instead, you just blew people out of the water without due process in a tough guy move in some sort of deranged foreign policy related to narco-terrorism.
I think that someone should file, if they haven't already, a Freedom of Information Act request for the full video of that shooting, of the killing of those 2 individuals, because what's the Trump regime going to claim? That it's classified? They've already released all of the image other than that part of it, right? They showed it off. They posted it on social media. And I think that as sick and disturbing as that image is, I think that it's important to actually see the war crimes that are being committed. It's also notable that during the oral argument a few years back on the issue of absolute immunity, one of the hypotheticals that was used by the liberal justices who voted against absolute immunity was a question to Trump's lawyer. Do you believe Trump could order SEAL Team 6 to kill his political opponents? And then the lawyer, who's now the Solicitor General at the DOJ, tried to avoid the question and then ultimately said yes. I think that that is something that you could do if it was viewed as an official act under Article 2, if there was a war being declared or if there was something in taking care of Executive 2 functions. Yeah, I think you could. And then there was a debate. You'll recall our coverage on Legal AF between the right-wing justices, 6 of them who ultimately gave Trump absolute immunity, and the liberal justices who voted against it. And the right-wing justices were telling the liberal justices, stop it. Those hypotheticals are never going to happen. What we're worried about is the split-second decisions that a president needs to make. And if they're worried that they could be criminally prosecuted, they won't be able to make those decisions. To which the liberal justices says, you know what? We've been a country for a pretty long time, and no former president was ever worried about such a thing because they followed the law. And if you're worrying about those things, then maybe you're a criminal and maybe you're involved in criminality, because there's never been this concept of absolute immunity since the very founding of our Constitution was based on no kings. You want to talk about originalist thinking? Right? That's one of the frameworks that the Supreme Court's, we're originalists. We interpretate the original framing. The whole freaking Constitution was created as a reaction against the kings, against the monarchy in Britain. So the whole thing was created against absolute immunity. But I think it's interesting because actually Trump used that ruling, as he always does. You give him an inch, he takes your life, is what I've always said. And in this case, he's used that ruling and said, I can go and kill people. I can send ICE on the streets and I won't be held accountable. I. But as Popak makes clear, the people who are in that chain of command, who are following the unlawful orders, there will be a time, as Jamie Dimon said, where there'll be a new DOJ. And again, I think that any Democratic candidate in the primaries is going to be asked, what is your position about the United States joining with the International War Court? What's your view of the United States following international law when it comes to war crimes? What would you give immunity to Hegseth and these types of people? Would you pardon them and would you protect them from war prosecutions? And I don't see how any Democrat makes it out of the primary without saying we will agree to any international ramifications for these people who committed war crimes. We will not offer protection and we will not offer any immunity or pardons. I don't see how you make it through the primaries unless you make those commitments. And also, we're going to tear down the golden ballroom crap and we're going to remove all of this stuff. I think that will be a litmus test.
Welcome back. We sit at the intersection of law and politics, so you don't have to. It's a podcast. We formed it 5 years ago at the intersection of law and politics on Wednesday and Saturday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern time. We call it Legal AF. And in the meantime, I'd like you to, if you haven't seen us before, watch us on YouTube, listen to us on audio, and then come over to Legal AF, the YouTube channel, as we continue to grow that. And cross the 1 million subscriber barrier, become a subscriber there as well. And Legal AF Substack, where you won't get enough of all the insider knowledge that we provide you on Legal AF Substack. So until my next report, I'm Michael Popak. I'm Michael Popak, and I got some big news for our audience. Most of you know me as the co-founder of Midas Touch's Legal AF and the Legal AF YouTube channel, or as a 35-year national trial lawyer. Now, building on what we started together on Legal AF, I've launched a new law firm, the Popak Firm, dedicated to obtaining justice through compassionate and zealous legal representation. At the Popak Firm, we are focused on obtaining justice for those who have been injured or damaged by a life-altering event, by securing the highest dollar recoveries. I've been tirelessly fighting for justice for the last 35 years, so my own law firm organically building on my Legal AF work just feels right. And I've handpicked a team of top-tier trial fighters and settlement experts throughout all 50 states known as big auto injury attorneys who have the know-how to beat heartless insurance companies, corporations, government entities, and their attorneys. Big Auto's attorneys working with my firm are rock stars in their respective states and collectively responsible for billions of dollars in recoveries. So if you or a loved one have been on the wrong side of a catastrophic auto, motor vehicle, rideshare, or truck accident, suffered a personal injury, or been the victim of medical malpractice, employment harassment or discrimination, or suffered a violation of your civil and constitutional rights, then contact the Popak Firm today at 1-877-POPAK-AF or by visiting my website at www.thepopakfirm.com and fill out a free case evaluation form. And if we determine that you have a case and you sign with us, we don't get paid unless you do. The Popak Firm, fighting for your justice every step of the way.